Aaron, tell me, buddy, where were you when you watched the Baltimore Ravens lose in prime time to the Las Vegas Raiders? Because I'll never forget where I was. I was in a painful place because my God, I wasn't ready for, I don't think anybody was ready for that Vegas crowd. That Vegas crowd came ready to party, and you could just tell watching the game that Lamar was shook. He was uncomfortable. He was going up against a garbage team, but just the environment of the moment absolutely fueled the Raiders and hindered the Ravens. But I think the key is, and as we're going to get into on this video, is not overreacting to the things we saw in
Yes.
week one. Because
Yes.
have you ever heard, do you know anything about sample sizes, Aaron?
Oh, a little bit,
A
like a
little bit.
small sample, a
Yeah. So
small amount.
so like if you have a coalition of data, like is it more reliable when it's based on a small sample or a larger sample?
Very large. 'Cause, man,
Large,
what?
right?
Yeah.
So, anybody who thinks they know everything about a football team or a situation after 1 week of NFL football is just disrespecting any thought they put into it for the last 5 months. And I think we're just going to go speedy through each game and find situations where the unexpected happen. And just what we're going to do is we're going to take 5 months of analysis and make incremental changes based on what we saw week one, not drastic changes. I don't suddenly think the Raiders are a great football team, as I don't suddenly think the Packers are one of the worst teams in football. I think football happens and there's a lot of parity in the NFL. So let's break it down. So is there any game particularly you want to start with?
You know, let's start with a fun one. Start with the early game, the Eagles and Falcons, because
Eagles Falcons, great game. So I mean, listen, this is actually a great point for next week's line. So going into next week, the Falcons are 12 and a half point underdogs to the Bucks, and they're at home, I believe. And that's just a lot of points. And the Bucks can probably cover it. Personally, I took them on a teaser. I took it Falcons plus 20. Because here's the thing, like I don't think anybody thought the Falcons were a good football team, not after the last couple of years. I personally ranked them in like the bottom eight, but their horrible performance week one is a little worse than they actually are, and especially walking into a division game in week two against the Buccaneers, there's no reason to jump to worst case scenario and say the Falcons are going to get blown out by everyone every week. I mean, listen, they're a bad football team, but they went up against an Eagles team that was very black box. There was hard to expect what could happen, and the Eagles came out sharp, and the Falcons came out flat, and they still have Matt Ryan, they still have weapons, and they're still a good source of both fantasy value and covering large spreads.
yeah, and I was shocked with the Falcons because on my show, the Dynasty Wonderland with my co-host Ryan, we were picking who we thought was going to win the game, and I actually took the Falcons because I was like, oh, Falcons, Eagles, kind of viewed them as pretty similar teams in terms of overall skill level. And I was like, you know what, give me the home team on that one. Clearly a bad take, but
Yeah, I mean, it happens.
yeah, but that's what it's some of it can be just who they're matched up with. These mobile quarterbacks, Jalen Hurts in this case, there are teams that have no answer whatsoever for these types of quarterbacks, the Kyler Murrays, the Lamar Jacksons, the now Jalen Hurts. Maybe that's what the Falcons are. I mean, because Falcons already lack talent, and then adding a quarterback that can get you 60, 70 rushing yards on top of that, oh, even worse. So, and especially we've talked about division games, maybe off camera, maybe on camera over on my podcast, but the division games, anything can happen. Like I personally don't like betting on them. And you mentioned they're what, a 12 and a half point underdog at home. Like, geez, I don't feel comfortable taking the Buccaneers. Because which Buccaneers are we going to have? The Buccaneers, they it was a great game to kick off the season, but they didn't exactly handle the Cowboys like they were supposed to.
They left 29 points. Also, let's an important thing to look at too is I always think to last year's Chiefs when around week 13 people are saying, oh, this team's not gonna make the Super Bowl, they can't cover a single spread, they're barely beating teams, and I turned around and said, well, it's not that they're barely beating teams, it's that they know that they just need to do enough to win, the extra points don't
Yeah.
matter. And Tampa Bay is going to do that more weeks than not. Like if you think Gronkowski's coming out for 8 targets next week, you're out of your mind. They're going to use Gronkowski when they need to. And week three, Tampa Bay goes to Los Angeles to play the Rams at 425.
Right.
So they're thinking about week 3. They're not worried about Atlanta. They're not going to come out and beat Atlanta 35-13. They might if there's a bunch of errors and stuff, but the game plan is to win by enough.
Right.
And if you want to put them on like a teaser and get more points, that's even better. But from like a fantasy perspective and what we learned from both teams is because I also had the Eagles as a bad team coming into the year. I think I had them one behind the Falcons because of the QB unknown. I think we can respectfully move them at least one ahead of the Falcons. I'm not going to move them up 5 slots, but one ahead. It's still a defense with a lot of questions. And, they had a very easy matchup against a flat Falcons team, but they look good. And what we can take away from player usage is that Jalen Hurts is going to be this year's late round Konami quarterback that returns value. Miles Sanders is a reasonable RB2, but he's
Mhm.
still in a committee. A lot of guys got work. Devontae Smith will continue to flash and could potentially have a great rookie season. It was a good start, but we'll see how he does in harder game situations. And Dallas Goedert is certainly going to be one of those tight end 6 to 10 types who will fall flat some weeks, but maybe like 8 weeks, he'll be your tight end 1. And if he's your tight end 1 right now on your team, you're feeling all right. You're not feeling great, but you can win with Goddard. And I think from the Falcons side of the ball, it's all about Pitts and Ridley, and that's pretty much it. And you
Oh
really
yeah.
don't want anything else. But that's from a fantasy point. From a gambling point, I'm going to attack that Falcons spread in teasers. And for now, I'm going to pretty much avoid the Eagles until we get a bigger sample from them. Maybe around week 4 to 5, I'd be more comfortable
Yeah.
placing a bet on them. But
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean that's a good game to start with. I want to circle back to Monday Night Football because that was just an absurd game. And I think what people need to take away from this game, I had the Ravens ranked as like a top 18 in my power rankings. And I think it's fair to move them a little closer to 10, but I don't think it's fair to say that they're not the powerhouse they've been the recent years because it's still very well built roster. And this
Mhm.
is this is the problem with the Ravens, and this is also why I wait till a couple weeks in to make my Super Bowl futures because I really like the Ravens. I told you last week on the DW pod that was my dark horse for the Super Bowl. I've since taken them off of my list, not because they lost to the Raiders. Listen, good teams lose games because I think we saw with impunitive proof now after enough years of seeing this happen in big spots when they need big plays. The Ravens can't rely on Lamar Jackson's arm. And he gets frazzled, and you can tell, like on Monday night, they're trying to design plays to get him back into a rhythm. And you need a quarterback that out of nowhere can find a rhythm without your play calling making it for him and it really just showed that 3 years now in a row against the Raiders. That I don't think when the moment is there and they need to capture lightning in a bottle, I just don't see them doing it. He's not Eli Manning, who beat the Patriots twice in clutch passes. He's just a really good player who's going to win 11, 12 games a year in games that they're in command of, but they're going to struggle to get it done unless everything falls their way.
Right. Because that was something I when I was looking into the Ravens and Raiders, because for people that are listening to the show and don't know, I do a Monday Night Football preview piece that's going to be on playerprofiler.com each week. And when I looked at Lamar Jackson, probably the number one thing that caught my attention is not a lot really changed from him, the quarterback, from year 1 to year 2. Basically, what he was good at, he was still good at. What he was bad at, he was still bad at. So it's a little concerning in terms of like long term. He gets away because he is a freak athlete. Literally, you can't. Good luck trying if you take a bad angle with him. If you miss a sack, like he's gone. But yeah, I'm with you. Like I took the Ravens and the spread. My predicted score is 27-17, and I felt good early. And then it really, when the Raiders scored 10 straight points, and then the Ravens' response was they stopped being able to move the ball. I was like, oh, I'm not feeling so good about this.
Yeah, and listen, the Ravens gassed out and gave up. It was obvious,
Mhm.
especially when they didn't wait for that Brian Edwards overtime touchdown call. They were just on the field, like, all right, we're out, get us out of here, we're over. And listen, that happens. And a big takeaway to take away from the Raiders is I still think they're the second worst team in the league. I
Mhm.
rank them there just ahead of the Texans, and those two teams haven't moved for me, even based on what we saw this weekend. And I think two things to keep in mind for the Raiders is clearly John Gruden is like the Pete Carroll type, the Rex Ryan type. He is a motivator, a locker room motivator. Players
Right.
like playing for the Raiders. We hear all these offseason big names saying they would play for the Raiders. His guys never give up, and they play hard, and that's why sometimes they upset these good teams. They beat the Chiefs last year, like so. You got to be careful when the Raiders are playing a great team in a big moment because they show up. But for the most part, the poor quality of this franchise as a whole is going to show itself in the weeks to come. Especially if you go back and watch that game, I made a tweet about it. They made every single mistake in the book. The offensive line looked terrible. They
Yeah.
had Derek Carr, for as good as I think he is, and I do think people underrate him, the one problem with him is he still makes these boneheaded decisions that someone with his experience shouldn't make, especially in clutch moments. And we see it every year in big games. And the defense was atrocious. Like Carl Nassib, incredible. I support the man 100%. Whatever he did in the offseason worked. That was a heck of a game. Still a bad defense. They're coming out and playing the Steelers, and the line is Steelers -6. If you're not taking the Steelers -6 at home, they're going on the road now to Pittsburgh for a 1 o'clock game in Pittsburgh. Like they're not going to be as motivated as they were Monday night on a short week. Like that's a very easy. The Steelers will come out and win that game, and let's not consider the Raiders more than they are. They're a tricky to guess team because sometimes they come to play hard, but for the most part, this is not an upper tier football team.
And there was something that there was a Vegas trend there. I want to say the Raiders were 5-1 in their last six like primetime games, which just fully supports that. It's when the bright lights are on and everybody's watching, they show up to play. They play up to their competition or play down to their competition. So yeah, it's super frustrating when I'm sitting there trying to be an analyst and analyze the game, and the Raiders are so all over the place because they really did look like two completely different teams in the first half, second half. I was being a smartass on Twitter, which is what I normally do on Twitter. People that want to follow, it's at Aaron Stew, STEW 09. So Aaron Stew 09 at Twitter. It was midway through the second quarter, and I was like, Derek Carr finally has more yards of offense than Marcus Mariota. So this, and then Derek Carr finishes with over 400 passing yards. It was at that point he had gotten 35 passing yards, and then he finishes the game with 435. Like just this game in the two halves, like that's Raider football for you, where they look like trash. They look like one of the worst teams. I'm with you. I feel like they're one of the worst teams. And then in the second half, it's like, what? Where was this?
Yeah, so I think the moral of the story is be careful with the Raiders in big spots. Be careful with them with big lines, but in irrelevant spots, you can go against the Raiders. And listen, this is some hard hitting, non overreacting here. Maybe introductions are appropriate. This is being presented to you by myself, the early down grinder, Chris Barangora, with the Blockchain Sports Bets podcast, and I'm joined today by Aaron Stewart from Dynasty Wonderland. If you follow either of us, you've probably heard us talking on his pod. This guy's the best. You got to follow his cornerback wide receiver matchups. Basically, any weekly column he's posting this year. I read them all last week, and for the first time in 2 years, I actually won money in DFS based on things that he put out there. So, very good follow if you actually want to listen to smart people. But yeah, that's who you're with today. Normally, this is just me talking about bets in front of the camera. Glad to have you with me here, bud. But let's
Thanks for having
push
me.
it forward. Of course, of course. So I think one game that we don't need to say anything about is Rams Bears. Both these teams came out, did precisely what we expected. The Rams are a great team. They're going to be great all year. They have a legitimate chance to finish as the 1 seed in the NFC. And the Bears are a middle of the pack team that will struggle to consistently produce so long as they don't start Justin Fields and gamble on them as such. So we'll pass on those two. Nothing new. No one's overreacting there. What about Arizona and Tennessee? Because Arizona was everything we expected and then some. But Tennessee, I mean, that one hurt a lot of fantasy gamers and a lot of gamblers in very special places.
That one hurt because I definitely have in my major home league. I have a ridiculous Ryan Tannehill, AJ Brown, Julio Jones stack that on paper looks amazing to build around. But when it does like what it did in week one, my chances of winning is 0%.
Yeah, but those happen, man. Like I have
They
teams
do.
with Wilson, Locke, and Metcalf stacks, and that's a great stack in week 1. But there's going to be some game week 9 where they combine for 13 points, and you hate yourself, you know. So
Ah,
you got to take the go with the bad on that. I think
absolutely.
Tennessee was just flat, and we need to just go on the assumptions we had from the offseason and
Yes.
see how they go moving forward. Now, if by week 3, week 4, we don't get these high efficiency, crazy performances we saw them putting up last 2 years with Ryan Tannehill, then I think it's fair to assume that maybe the Cinderella story is coming to an end and this is more of an average team. But one bad performance being unexpected for Kyler Murray and for Chandler Jones to just absolutely bully that offensive line. I don't we can't write off our fantasy football or gambling takes for the Titans just yet.
I think one of the things that did concern me is I don't care when I'm going from week 1 to week 2. I go forget about whether it was a bad performance, good performance, whatever. Like it's fresh slate. But I like looking at trends. And a concerning trend for the Titans is yes, they lost Arthur Smith. And then the coach speak is, oh, we lost him as our OC, but we're still going to do the same thing. I mean, we've got Derrick Henry. Why will we stop? Like, why will we had so much success the way we were playing? We'll just keep doing the same thing, except they didn't. And like play action. Play action has been key for the Titans. Like that's what revitalized Ryan Tannehill's career. And it works so well when you have a Derrick Henry. But they ran play action. I don't have the exact percent. I saw it on Twitter, but it was low. It was like the 10 to 12%. Whereas last year they were running it at a much higher rate, like 3-4 times as high as what it was. Like they compared week 1 last season to week 1 this season, and it's like, wow. I really hope, as you mentioned, hopefully it's not the trend, but it was a concerning thing to see in week 1. Maybe it was because the Cardinals just came out and punched them right in the mouth, and then you really can't do play action when you're basically forced to have to go to shotgun in order to pass and catch up. So I'll be watching a couple of other things. I can't wait for a couple more weeks to pass so that we know, are the Titans legit? Are they, are they still running that Arthur Smith offense they said they were going to run? Because, yeah, that's going to be perfect on this one. So
Yeah.
a little nervous, but not going to overreact. Let's get a new game in there.
No, I agree. And I think like I had said over the offseason at some point that the Cardinals should build on their 8-8 season from last year. And it looks like they will, but until we can't determine this as an elite team yet until we
Yes.
see how they react in a situation where they're under 5. So we saw them in a situation where they can dominate and they dominated, and that's amazing. Now they're going to play the Vikings next week as 4.5-point favorites. I'm not necessarily thinking they're going to definitely cover that based on last week because I want to see what they do in a game against a really good team where maybe they're down 2 scores going into the half and they're the ones being brutalized. If they can come back and put up a respectable performance in a game like that, then I'm willing to say, okay, yeah, this is a year where we got to consider the Cardinals top 10. Right now, I think I ranked them at like 11 or 12 in my power ranking. So I already considered them very highly coming into the year. But we could be in a situation where by the end of the year, where like the Cardinals are this year's Bills, where they're like, oh, this is a top 5 team, or we could end the year where they're just kind of like, still where they started. So I think we got to wait on the jury. And for the Titans, this is a tricky spot. They're going into week 2 playing the Seahawks. Which is almost an identical game,
Yeah.
maybe just minus Chandler Jones. And the line is -5.5 Seahawks and over 54. And I wouldn't bet this game expecting exactly what we saw last week. I honestly wouldn't bet this game at all. But I would expect the Seahawks to win. But honestly, we don't know. It's been 1 week. And in terms of fantasy football, I would say for both teams, keep all your takes exactly the same, except bump Chase Edmonds up. That's pretty much it.
Absolutely. I got nothing else to add on that one.
Yeah, what do you
It's
got? Hit
just,
me with a game you want to talk
let's
about.
see. There was here was a good one. Here was one that I was excited to follow. I didn't get to watch it, just not in my area, but Chargers and the Washington football team, just two teams that Chargers I feel like is the team in the AFC that's ready to take a step forward. That's always snake bitten, and Washington was a sneaky team. Like they were good in a completely different way. Like most teams are good because they got good quarterbacks. It's clearly not the case with Washington, but The thing that did surprise me, I was wrong on this one. That's probably why I chose this game to talk about. I was like, oh yeah, give me Washington, a home team. I pointed, I was like, that defensive line, good, just good luck stopping that. And the Chargers stopped that. So,
Well,
I,
the mid-game quarterback change makes it hard to tell if that was a good take or not. You
yeah,
know, if Fitzpatrick played the whole game, could have been different.
mm-hmm.
But
But
I agree with you. That was definitely a good game. I think the important takeaway there is the Washington football team defense is a really good defense, and
yes,
Chargers still put up 20, and Herbert still looked good. And for me, that's
yes,
confirmation with confidence to play the Chargers as a high octane team, not necessarily an elite team, but a high octane team. Rashawn Slater, clear hit. Corey Linsley, still great. So the offensive line is clicking. And, well, the takeaway from this is that the offense is producing. So going into week 2, for example, they're playing the Cowboys at home with a 51-point over under. That's an easy over
yep,
because that's two productive offenses. Both teams are going to be hungry for that W, especially the boys coming off a hard loss. And these are two defenses that I respect the top end talent of the Chargers defense, but is it better than Tampa's defense? No. So what's going to keep this game from going over? Especially because Dak and Dallas are hungry. I even would consider. I actually already took. I've teased the Dallas is +3 up to +10 because they'll cover 10. I mean, the
oh
Chargers
yeah,
aren't going to blow them out, and I think we can confidently say the Chargers are just an improved version of what we saw last year. And the defense, we can't tell yet what they are because you can't evaluate them based on that type of game situation. And for Washington, for at least I had them pegged as right in the middle, the 16th team in my power rankings, completely average. And I think that's spot on. The defense is amazing, but there's too many question marks on offense. And unfortunately, in 2021, defense doesn't win football games. Like, this is the perfect team in 1998, but it's not 1998. One stud receiver, Antonio Gibson, a great defense, they win a Super Bowl. Not 1998, sorry, pals. So just an average team that, frankly, most weeks I'm probably not going to bet unless it's an under in a sloppy game like Thursday Night Football is preparing to be between the Chargers and the Giants. That is just going to be, ugh, probably not going to watch it.
it is a Cowboys fan that of course, follows the rest of the NFC East. Yeah, it's not going to be pretty. It is after having the amazing Thursday night football game to kick off the season. We are what is each year the Thursday night football games are usually just hot garbage. And I wrote about Thursday night football games last season. I wrote about every single one of them, and most were just hot garbage. It didn't matter. Hey, when the Buccaneers playing, it was a hot garbage game, and that's with a great quarterback that played. So yeah, like looking ahead at the Thursday night football, and I want to say the over under of last I saw was at 41. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm
I'll tell you right
probably
now,
still going to go under.
it's down to 40.5, but this game might end 17-3. I have no idea, Aaron. I mean,
Yeah.
divisional game on a short week is something typically I'm not going to bet. But if you're doing one of those did DraftKings like showdowns, just
I suck at those, the
I suck at
showdowns.
them. But you know what's crazy? I took 3 this last weekend. All of them I at least netted even, which is crazy. I was in the money on
Nice.
all of them, but I'm usually terrible. They're so hard. But if you were going to take a showdown, expect a low scoring game. Try to just peg the one guy who's going to score as your captain. Go from there.
Yes.
I mean, a decent bet could be like Logan Thomas because we saw James Bradbury make Cortland Sutton look like a sophomore in college last week.
Yeah.
So I love Terry. I think he can overcome anything, but it's not unreasonable to think Terry has a slow week. Um, Not unreasonable, but a guy who's hard to avoid in fantasy. But that's that. So I think it's time we talk about the elephant in the cheese. You know, the good old Green Bay Packers. Because my God, you know what? For this one, I need to turn on the Cuervo light because we need to call out to the heavens of drinking on Sunday that people do not overreact to this. We need to have hope and faith in years and years of Aaron Rodgers' career and 2 years in a row with AFC Championship games by the Packers. Everybody believe in the Cuervo. Vive Mas. Vive
He'll
Cuervo.
he'll turn
Okay.
this he'll turn this into Cuervo.
Aaron Rodgers turns water into Cuervo and your hopes and dreams into blocks of cheese. Okay, this is the type of game that you just almost need to entirely disregard. And I'm not saying don't
Yes.
take anything away from it, but complete outlier performances where a team just comes out completely flat is disconnected on every level. I mean, Jameis Winston scored 5 touchdowns on 150 yards. That's all you need to know that the Saints didn't crush this game. The Packers came out and lost this game every step of the way. And you need to take away individual player performances, but we can't. Like, I had them ranked 3 in my power rankings. At most, I'll put them to 5. I'm not pushing them out of the top 5. This is still one of the best teams in football. They'll still probably be in the AFC Championship game. I mean, good teams lose games. It happens.
Right. And we talk about overreactions. Well, the first thing with this game is Aaron Rodgers, the famous video, RELAX. Relax. I mean, even the GOAT Tom Brady. What was it? A few years ago, maybe even further back. The years just kind of a jumbled mess when they got beat badly by the Chiefs, and everyone's like, "That's it for Brady. Let's put in Garoppolo." Like, just let's stop it. Stop with the overreactions. And in fantasy football, there's going to be overreactions, and on both sides too. You look at the Saints, their number one receiver, Marcus Callaway, with a measly 1 catch for 14 yards. I don't have his stats pulled up, but he didn't do well because there has to, of course, be some context put there. He's matched up with Jair Alexander for the game. And if you don't know your cornerbacks there, that's okay. I'll forgive you. But Jair Alexander makes every single receiver look silly. So, of course, the second-year undrafted rookie free agent in his second season playing against Jair Alexander, good luck. Like, that performance, wasn't surprised. But people playing in fantasy football leagues, someone is going to drop him. Someone's going to drop him tonight in order to pick up, I don't know, they'll pick up Christian Kirk. Not that Kirk's bad, but Kirk's not going to score 2 touchdowns. Kirk played half the snaps. Don't do that to yourself.
The furthest you should drop Callaway is from your flex to your bench, no further. But I mean, that's if you even started him, but nobody did. But the thing to take away really is that the injuries on Green Bay's offensive line do matter. You know, losing Lindsley and having Bakhtiari out for 8 weeks or whatever it is, that's going to hurt them. And they definitely need to get their linebackers healthy. I'm not worried about this being a good team. Here's how you know not to be worried about the Packers and them being great, and why you should consider them exactly what you considered them 4 days ago. The line going into next week is -10 against the Lions at home. If Vegas doesn't care, you shouldn't care. And that's all I'll say about the Packers. But on the Saints, I think we can't evaluate anything from this performance, because even Jameis Winston's performance, 5 touchdowns on 150 yards is really not thanks to him. I mean, it is. I'm not detracting his career efforts or his efforts as a human being. I'm rooting for Jameis Winston every step of the way. As an analyst of the sport, we can't just say Jameis Winston torched them. And he even had a play when they were up 10-0. He threw a pick that got called back on the softest roughing the passer ever. And that could have been a turning point in the game. So Jameis isn't infallible up to this point in the season. And the only thing we can't evaluate either side of the ball. We can't say that the defense is definitively great. We can't say that the offense is, fine without Drew Brees or any weapons. We can certainly say that the offensive line is fierce as ever, even though the center just got hurt. So that could affect it, but they were blocking holes my God, it looked like OnlyFans. But the what's it called? The only thing we know for sure from that game is that Sean Payton is still really good at game planning. I can go into week 2 saying the Saints will probably have a much better game plan than a team like Carolina. But the only edge you can definitively give the Saints in any matchup right now, until we see a couple more games, is game planning. They're better at game planning than probably 28 teams in the NFL, maybe all of them. It was a pretty good game plan, but I can't say for sure that anything else about them is good or bad, because it's so hard to evaluate in a game like that that's so just in left field. So please, people, vive mas. All right, Aaron, I think it's time for the next one.
Perfect.
Let's get a little less spicy. And we'll talk about the Seahawks and the Colts, a game that realistically was pretty boring. So, what we can take away from this is that the Seahawks are the Seahawks. Just look at 4 years of data. That's what you're getting out of the Seahawks. A Chris Carson who gets RB1 usage, two stud receivers, one of the best quarterbacks in football, a defense that can get off the field on third down, but you shouldn't be scared of in your fantasy matchups. That's pretty much it for the Seahawks. We'll see you in playoffs if Russ stays healthy. For the Colts, did you have anything to add for the Seahawks or?
No, there's nothing really, as you mentioned. That's especially those teams that have had coaches that have been coaching them forever. Just like talk about the Saints came prepared, of course. Sean Payton's been the coach forever, and Pete Carroll's been the coach of the Seahawks forever. So no real surprises there.
Yeah, good. All right, great. There we are. Now the Colts, I'm just gonna say give them time. Let's see a couple weeks. I mean, this time last year, I was the biggest Colts fan out there, and this time 3 weeks ago, I wrote an article of completely eviscerating the Colts, and I think there's somewhere in between my opinions of them the last 2 years. I think there's still obviously a lot of good in the organization, and there's certainly talent at certain places. I think some of the offseason losses, like Justin Houston and key players coming off of injury and key players being injured, just a lot of factors working against the chemistry and the on-field product. I think we can reliably look at certain guys like Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines to be situationally great. Zach Pascal has his day in court as long as T.Y. Hilton's on the sideline, and there's still something here, but they're a below average team for the time being. They can definitely pick up steam and improve as the season goes on, but I'd say for the next 3 to 4 weeks until we know for sure, like Carson Wentz is some type of form of his former self, and we know for sure that this defense has gotten its legs, then I'm just considering them a bad team right now that I assume will get better as the season goes on because the defense will start to figure it out and they'll start to be able to game plan with some film, and we'll see about Carson Wentz. He might become great, or Jonathan Taylor will just erupt and start plowing linebackers over left and right. One of the two, but I'm not going to say they're completely bad, but I'm not really scared of them in any regard right now in fantasy and gambling. And I'm not really expecting too much from them based on what we saw week 1 and what we expected coming into the season, because I expected just a really bad version of this Colts team that has been otherwise good. But we've also seen in the past, the years where everything clicks, they do really well. And the years where they have major hurdles, they don't do well. Like the first year after Andrew Luck, when they had to play Brissett all year, like they won 2 games. It's just that's a team that can only do as good as what they have to work with. And right now, what they have to work with is shaky.
And also one of the trends that it's honestly when we started recording and talking about the Colts is that the Colts almost always start slow under Frank Reich's his time as the coach.
True. They lost to Jacksonville week 1 last year.
Yeah,
Embarrassingly.
Yes. And Frank Reich is, I would say that he's a solid coach. Like, I don't want to say good coach, but mainly it's nothing against him. It's like, I just really try to reserve that. Like, he has shown he's got a decent track record here with the Colts. And Chris Ballard is, admittedly, I'm biased here. I feel like Chris Ballard is the best GM overall, like in all the different things a GM has to do.
He's very good.
And that team has depth. I mean, Zach Pascal is a perfect example that, oh no, we lost T.Y. Hilton, and that they could sub in a Pascal. That is he going to be a world beater? No, but he did score 2 touchdowns, and like when his number's called, he's usually respectable. Now, my takeaway on this is that in the early part of the season, sure, we'll probably have bad goals. There is still a lot of change there. There's still even Carson Wentz, which the jury is out, as you mentioned. We don't know which Wentz we've got, but also it doesn't even really matter at this point because Wentz and the Colts offense, and vice versa, Colts offense and Carson Wentz, they're trying to get used to each other. Like that's been the one thing.
And they had no August of practice. They lost all of August. So yeah.
Right. And then on top of that too, it's like the one thing that's really killed the Colts these past few seasons, honestly, stud offensive line that has continuity. And would be great if they had a quarterback behind the line that's been the same quarterback year after year after year. Like even if it was something like Jared Goff, who had all that time with the Rams, like having a quarterback, I don't think they needed a top talent quarterback. That's why I mentioned Jared Goff. They could have just a guy that has been there all those years, and the offensive line knows his tendencies there. But this, 3 years, 3 different starting quarterbacks that all started with Andrew Luck surprise retirement. You've got Jacoby Brissett, to Phillip Rivers to now Carson Wentz, and each quarterback plays very different styles there. So, of course, it makes a lot of sense now on why they've started so slow in past seasons, because then they're going to gel. Because on offense, really all the pieces are there that were there last season, except brand new quarterback. So not overly worried on this one. That was probably the right expectation in a game like this. The
Yeah,
Seahawks win by 12.
continuity matters, and for the time being, I'm willing to say that they'll probably play similar to this level for at least 2 more weeks, and we'll see as how they improve. And the last bit about the Colts, like I would say in terms of rankings, they're right in that tier of like what the Broncos have been for the last couple of years, and like teams like the Broncos or the Bears, where like maybe not the Bears, but the Broncos, where they make all the right choices and they have good management and the team has talent, but just not the right pieces at the right places to win enough games. But they're going to like hover around 500. They're going to have some big wins. They're going to have some bad losses, and they're going to be hard to predict because you don't know how cohesive their game plan is going to be week to week. But the difference between a team like the Bears in this instance or the Colts, where I don't think the Bears are well managed, but they have had a talented roster for some years now, but they went like all in 3 years ago, but at the wrong positions and did nothing with it. Chris Ballard is a very reserved poker player, and he's not going all in unless he pulls like a full house out of the river. You know, he's waiting until he knows for sure his window is open, and then he'll do things like sign Julio Jones in the offseason. So don't expect the Colts to be elite until the pieces come together, but understand that if the opportunity ever presents itself, he's keeping this roster nourished 24/7 every year so that the
Yes.
day that the right quarterback comes along, the right edge rusher, the right free safety, and the right wide receiver all coalesce to form that power unity of the four key positions you need to win a football game, they're going to be in the Super Bowl, I promise you.
Yep.
It's not this year. It's not this year. So sorry, Colts. I love you, but I gotta forget you. Now you're just a bad ex that still calls every Friday night. I'm like, listen, I'm not up. Where you at? But all right. So a little boring, but we made it a tad spicy. We're like when you get your ramen with medium spice, not full spice. But let's go to how about you? You want to pick one? I feel like I picked the last couple.
Let's see. Well, actually, I chose that Colts and Seahawks game. I'm looking. Yeah, well, yeah, I know this is a game that you're going to want to talk about. Steelers and Bills.
Yeah, honestly, as much as I'd love to talk about it, I would say just go watch the video I put up for NFL Week 1 bets and just listen to my take on the Steelers because that sums it up perfectly. The Steelers, everybody chose to not like them for the wrong reasons. The only thing to focus on with the Steelers is forget about what you saw in playoffs. It's early season. This team started 11-0 last year. Ben's elbow has at least 10 weeks in it. He's going to have some bad performances, yes. But this is still a very good team, a very strong roster, a top 12 team. They're not easy to play against. And we can't even hold this against the Bills. This was a hard spot for the Bills. I think the Bills come out and smash in Miami week 2 in a bounce game. But we can't say the Bills are any worse than we expected just walking into a buzzsaw. And I think if you had the right expectation of the Steelers, like I did, you were correct in that they're obviously not flashy. They're not a top 8 team. They're certainly not bad. They're one of the better teams. Bad teams are going to lose to them. Good teams will struggle with them. And we'll probably see them in the playoffs. Listen, the Ravens are playing the Chiefs week 2, and the Steelers are playing the Raiders. The Steelers will win and go 2-0. The Browns will win week 2 against the Texans and go 1-1. The Ravens might start 0-2. So now the Ravens are playing for a wild card at best. And the Steelers are in line to once again compete for the division. So I don't even need to say more. Just go listen to that video and understand that. Bet this team as a good team, understanding that some weeks they're gonna flop on you because Big Ben just woke up and his elbow is nah.
Yep.
That's how it is. That's literally it for that game. There's nothing else to take away except for Najee Harris 100% of snaps.
Yep. And I was about to mention that. And that's if you're playing dynasty leagues and someone is already like panicking after one game of drafting a running back, they probably took 101 in non-superflex. And even in superflex was probably the first non-quarterback to get drafted. Like, go get Najee Harris. The usage matters. The results, yes, we want the results. The results weren't there, but the usage was there. The usage tells us everything. Steelers want to run the ball. They clearly want to run the ball. Drafted him in the first round. gave him all the snaps, and they did that because they know, like, yes, we all point out, oh, Ben Roethlisberger, he can't throw the football like he used to. Of course not. Like, even before he had injured his elbow, just the fact that he's 38, 39 years old. Yeah. So the Steelers, that's a smart team. They know that they're still trying to win. They're still trying to win one for Ben. That's why they drafted Najee Harris. That's why they gave him all the carries. This type of game, a 23-16 game, you're going to see a lot more of those games than the Steelers games from maybe, I don't know, 2-3 years ago when Roethlisberger was still able to throw and Antonio Brown wasn't crazy, and they had him and Juju Smith-Schuster. Like, it's a different Steelers team. Like, we have some of the same names. Juju's still there, but this game. I feel the Steelers are one of the teams that after week one, it's like I have a pretty good pulse on what they are and what they're going to do.
If anybody ever tells you online that they can predict the outcome of football performances based on offensive line play, I have identified for you a liar, and I'm tired of that narrative. I watched the Raiders' offensive line be fucking terrible, and they
Mm-hmm.
beat the Ravens. The Steelers' offensive line wasn't even good. They weren't
Yep.
good, but they won the game. I'm tired of that offensive line play. I didn't know you were an offensive line scout person X on Twitter, because I'm pretty sure that, these are 200 of the best blockers in the world. I'm pretty sure they can figure it out. You know, and Tomlin even said early in the offseason, you can scheme things like offensive line play. Bad offensive line play will show its true form in the final 4 minutes of a game when you're going off script and you get sacked when you need a 20-yard completion. That's when it shows up. In the first, second, and third quarter, I don't care about the offensive line play. They're going to pull guards. They're going to double block guys that are good at blocking. They're going to keep a halfback in or put a second tight end on the field. There's ways to get around it. I don't care about offensive line play. I'm over it. Like, I never want to hear it again. All right, so that's a game that happened on Sunday. Now, another game that happened on Sunday was the Miami Dolphins playing the New England Patriots. Good old divisional football. I love to see it. I think we got, again, from two teams exactly what we should expect. I think it was a slow game because tough divisional game, a lot of defense, a lot of overlap. There's 10 starters that have played for both teams in the last 2 years. The Dolphins have 4 coaches that were Patriots coaches. These teams know each other intimately well. And I think we got exactly what we should expect. The Patriots are going to be a slow-paced, defensive-led team that are just trying to play respectable football with a good enough roster to compete in every phase of the game. They're still amazing at situational football, and they're just going to try to play Jones close to the cuff, and I wouldn't expect a lot of flash in their games, and I do expect them to come out and smush the Jets this upcoming week. The Dolphins is going to be one of these teams where we're never going to be able to explain how or why, but they're going to play good football, and they're going to be somewhere between average and above average. And I'm excited to see what Tua can do. And I think they did very well against a Patriots defense that people have kind of forgotten about a little bit. So I believe in the Dolphins. But I don't think they'll beat the Bills this week. And I think the Patriots are exactly what we should. They are the metronome of the NFL. Just tick tock, run the ball, tick tock, play some D. It's very, very monogamous, like very, monotonous.
Mm-hmm.
But hey, they do it well. They play good football.
And a much better offense from the Patriots. Like, people that, there's people that went, oh, Jonnu Smith or Hunter Henry, and it's like, well, why can't both produce? Really, like, that's their big money investments. Now we got to see a little bit more of their weapons. The wide receiver duo of Nelson Aguilar and Jacoby Myers. We're starting to see some roles. I think they were easily predicted roles of Aguilar is going to be the deep threat, much needed deep threat, probably used more than, like, his usage in this game. Like, people are going to go out and talk about overreactions. Aguilar scored a touchdown, so of course his fantasy points go up by 6 more points than the would if he hadn't scored a touchdown.
Yeah.
But come on, guys. At the end of the day, he got 7 targets out of 38. Let me see if I can do some math real quick. I can't do it in my head, but that's an 18% target share. And that's honestly the 7 targets. That's about what I would expect in a game where Mac Jones throws 39 passes there. Like, an 18% target share receiver doesn't move the needle. Like, that's just.
Well, here's what it is. Like, they're the team is perfect for best ball. The whole team, because it's a
Yes.
4 receiver committee between Henry, Jonu, Aguilar, and Jacoby, and they were all super cheap in best ball
Mhm.
drafts. And they'll have their weeks. You'll just never know when. It's a three-way backfield. Like it's the perennial best team for best ball because you know everything's a committee. It's like the 49ers. You can't predict the stuff. The only player who I like in redraft if he didn't lose his job after fumbling is Damian Harris because there's a legitimate case that he'll just get every red zone carry and could have
Yeah.
14 touchdowns. But besides the touchdown upside, if he still has his job, no one else there is reliable week in week out. So yeah, I mean Patriots just they're the Tom Brady Patriots light. They're just rookie Tom Brady Patriots. I don't know. If you went to a police sketch artist and you said draw Tom Brady, you'll get a picture of Mac Jones. Like that's how it is. And then the Dolphins just enjoy it while it lasts. I don't know how to explain it, but play the Dolphins, take the Dolphins. They're crazy. All right, I'm over
Yeah.
the Dolphins. So
Right.
we still have we have a couple. So we can talk about Denver and the Giants. So again, this should have been exactly what anyone should have expected. It was my lock of the week. Denver is just so painfully obvious that this is a team with a much improved defense and an easy schedule that's going to play defensive first football, run the ball a lot, keep it among their most skilled players. The one thing I was surprised by was the almost 55-yard bomb to Hamler because I didn't think that was in their repertoire. But like, a bunch of safe passes to Fant, to Sutton, to Judy, and just incrementally marching down the field. They didn't win in any flash. They just had enough 4-yard plays that they scored 20 times. And listen, in games where teams get an early lead on them or are just way flashy on offense, they're going to struggle. But against teams that are struggling, they're going to just outplay you. And that's what to expect from Denver. And that's why it was such a lock against the Giants, where anyone who's anyone, if you just listen to any beat reporter, we all knew the Giants were going to start slow. Kenny Galladay said the Giants are going to start slow. Everyone's injured. Everything's like we got to be careful with Saquon. They just so many injuries, this and that, and this and that. The Giants for now are garbage in every regard, and give them a couple weeks, and they'll be better. We'll get a surprise game from them at some point, but for now, bet them like they're garbage because they just are right now. They're starting slow.
Which, yeah, I'm with you. Like this definitely was the lock of the game because both teams were pretty predictable, quite frankly. Like, and taking the Denver side, I'm not even. Let's see, who's Denver even playing week 2? Like I can. You,
Denver has they have I have the lines up right here. Denver is
have to
going
find. I'm
against.
going to scroll for
Can't
you.
even find it.
I'm having to scroll up. Oh, wow, this could be an easy one. The Jaguars. Oh my gosh, they are
Yeah,
going to kill the Jaguars.
they're
It's
playing the
like
Jags in Jacksonville. Here's the thing, though.
they just won 14 points on the road
They just
against the
won
Giants.
They just won 14 points on the road, but my only skepticism with that line, they have the Giants at a line of -3. That's a really good line. -6, that's where I started to get into my kind of like discomfort zone. And the thing is, we'll actually talk, we'll merge this. We'll do this as a twofer. We'll talk about the Jaguar Texans also. Similar to Green Bay, New Orleans, we really can't take anything away from that game. It was just so like that's the one game the Texans will win all off season. They'll score more points in that game than the next 6 weeks combined. I wouldn't be surprised to see a stat in week 7 that says like week 1 scored 5 touchdowns since week 1, 4 total touchdowns. Like they're still garbage. They just like Jacksonville blew the Colts out of the water last year. Like it happens. I think we can definitely take away that Urban Meyer and this whole rigmarole of the offseason has certainly affected them, and they're still a trash team. But like Trevor Lawrence showed is probably great. He played pretty good given the circumstance. They still have really good receivers. I would expect Denver to come out and beat them, but I'm not confidently saying that them -6 is a lock again because we don't know. If they come out the first play, someone fumbles, Jaguars go up early, and now Trevor Lawrence connects with some of his receivers on big plays. Maybe Chenault breaks away a run. Like it's we don't know that Jacksonville is as bad as they looked Monday. And I think Denver, it's just they're so reliant on perfect game planning that I agree with you, Aaron. Like it should be as easy as you say, but I would never make a bet off the premise of, well, they won by 14 last week against a similarly bad team, you know?
Certainly. And on that one, yeah, probably just you hit the the big point is like 6 points is a lot already to begin with, and honestly, I didn't even know what the spread was. But yeah, especially being a road team. Oh man, how many road teams were that big of a favorite that actually covered last week? And that is a difficult thing to do, but man, like it just doesn't get easier for the Jaguars. I mean,
It's also
they
the home opener for Jacksonville, and we just saw what the home field did for the Saints. So, you know,
it's true, yeah.
I'm not as confident walking into that one, even though I loved the Broncos last week. But again, I think from a analysis of their team perspective, you're spot on. But from a
Right.
gambling on that line, I don't know.
That
And I
seems
only stopped you because on this channel, I'm trying to be very concise with the
no, no,
messaging.
and I like that because I want to, when people listen to the show, admittedly, I'm a rookie when it comes to this. Like, I'm aware of the concepts of spreads and totals, and I want to be better at being able to predict some of these games because, especially, I feel like that helps us analysts understand, like, a big reason I got one of my key wide receiver quarterback matchup that I got right was telling people, hey, you're going to want to fade Robert Woods. I know you just drafted him in like the fourth round, but don't start him in week one. And people are like, why was he so bad?
You
With the
saw it coming.
spread.
Yeah, anyone who was disappointed by Robert Woods in week one doesn't follow Aaron. And what
Yeah,
the audience needs to know is like Aaron is the quintessential fantasy football analyst in that he's actually analyzing stuff
great,
effectively. And there's something
great.
to learn when he speaks on fantasy football. But I'm bringing him in today to just a sharing of the minds, just to kind of like, like he said, he's a little more novice playing lines and odds, which is very different than fantasy football. And you actually, Aaron, you've been dabbling with incorporating Vegas lines and odds into your fantasy takes, and it's made
Certainly.
them even that much better.
It truly has because like there's a reason Vegas sets these lines. It's because like it really gets you thinking, like I just did, where I was like, "Ooh, man, I want to take Broncos, but I don't know about that." And like the Robert Woods thing, it was like, look, the Rams are 7.5 point favorite at that time. They're not gonna need to pass. And oh yeah, when the Rams are a huge favorite and they win, Robert Woods just isn't involved. He does basically nothing. And then lo and behold, Rams took care of a pretty easy game with the Bears. And Robert Woods, 4 targets,
And
wasn't very involved. Even scoring a touchdown, he did nothing.
yeah, and I interpreted that into taking parlays on Cooper Cup stats and
Mm-hmm.
playing not Robert Woods in Sunday night
Yes.
showdowns, and I interpreted it further than just sit him in fantasy. Like okay, well if he's gonna be bad, someone's got to be good. So
Right.
you can take what Aaron says and grow. But the reason I like talking to you now and going over the games is because it's a good way for people like you who have their heads in the analytics and you form a lot of your opinions based on numbers and not necessarily what you're seeing. It's a good way for you to kind of for people to see like, okay, here's how we assimilate and kind of take a step back from the numbers, because the numbers will never help you predict outcomes of games because the numbers don't account for the human element of games. That's where we need to kind of think logically and overcome these overreactions that you're going to hear everywhere on the internet this week that are just that overreaction. So,
Right.
while if you came to me and said, Chris, who do I start this week? I would say ask Aaron, like, but I would hope if someone came to Aaron and said, who do I play on the line this week? He would say, hey, ask Chris. So I and that's why I like talking to him about fantasy on his podcast. I'm bringing him here to talk about gambling on my podcast because
Love it.
together
Love it. The
together
crossover.
we're just going to succeed across every realm of football and gambling and fantasy football.
We're going to
But
predict this stuff, and we're going to make you, the listeners, just give you the edge. Like, we're not going to go and make your lineup decisions, and we're not going to tell you to place bets. We're going to give you the tools to think, because if you can use your brain, that's how you dominate your leagues. I
yeah, and
was,
go
yeah.
ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, 16 leagues that I'm in with mixture of dynasty and redraft. Went 12-4. Some of that is just doing some small things where I went and I have Robert Woods in a league and I sat him. And I know it seems ridiculous and bold at the time, but it's because look, I'm in it to win it. If my prediction's wrong, so be it. But I'm not playing safe here. I believe everything right in analyzing the game, and I'm either going to be 100% right or one of my teams I lost didn't come together. Oh well, 12-4, 75% win percentage in week one. I'll take it.
But fantasy also goes so much beyond just a start sit lineup.
Mhm.
And like I started Robert Woods in two of my leagues and won in those leagues, but not because of Robert Woods. But again, like I took a parlay prop for Stafford over 296 passing yards because I figured, hey, they're still going to throw, just not to Woods. I took Cup for one touchdown because if Woods ain't doing it, Cup's doing it. And then I took Montgomery over 13 and a half yards. And that's a parlay prop that hit, but I formed that whole prop off this premise that Aaron proposed of Robert Woods. And I said, well, if Aaron's right and I love what he presented, he's not going on the bench in my 12 team fantasy league because I'm not going to start like, Ola Zacchaeus over him. But I can do something with that in some form of gambling because you can gamble in so many different ways. Parlay props, monkey knife fight, DraftKings, FanDuel, your fantasy lineup, your sports book. There's a million ways to interpret this data and to use intelligent fantasy analysts and the data they come up with to then drive bets is such an efficient way to gamble if you don't want to do the work yourself. And I don't want to do
Yep.
the work myself, so I follow
Well,
Aaron.
and one of the things I gotta pat myself back on this one because like in doing the Monday night football game, for instance, it's I kind of had to put my money where my mouth was, and on Underdog Fantasy, they have the pick 'em where usually there would be something like over unders on either stats like receptions, yards, even fantasy points. I'll typically avoid the fantasy points on this one, but there was five total player props, and I divvied them up. It was like I had a three game parlay and a 2 game parlay or game, but like a prop parlay. And here was the three prop parlay. I had Josh Jacobs under 60 and a half yards from scrimmage. Smashed that one, only 40 yards. Marquise Brown over 55 and a half receiving yards. That one, like early third quarter, it was there. And then Tyson Williams over half a touchdown when that was. Like that one, awesome. Like made my money and made a profit. I was a little upset about the other one. So this was the super easy smash one was Darren Waller over 71 and a half receiving yards because until the very end of the fourth quarter and Brian Edwards became a thing, like that was the Raiders were telling us Darren Waller's all they got.
He had seven targets in like 5 minutes. It was crazy.
And even though he
Darren
only
Waller.
caught like two of them at that time, I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be fine. The other one was a heartbreaker because I had Tyson Williams over 65 and a half rushing yards. He finishes with 65 rushing yards and an MIA in the fourth quarter in overtime.
That's pain. And listen, that's gambling for you. But we're veering off topic. I'm sorry for your
Sorry,
visceral
yeah,
pain. So just to wrap up, Broncos steady, but hard games, they'll look bad. Giants garbage, Jacksonville, we really don't know yet. And the Texans are garbage, trust me. It was an off game. They're gonna get smushed by Cleveland next week. And listen, if you're gonna take Broncos -6 going to Jacksonville, somebody present me a better argument than will they beat the Giants because I mean probably a pretty good high school football team at this point could at least compete. No, I'm exaggerating. It's an NFL team. They'd smush them, but not very good. So let's do a little speed round here. Have we not talked about anyone? We hit on pretty much all of them on the head. The only ones we're really missing. I mean, listen, Jets, Carolina. If you need me to break that game down for you, then you're not a fan of football. Jets are garbage and they're injured. I love the Jets. Love the Jets. They just hope they're watchable. They're getting there. They're not very good, and all the players they signed this offseason are freaking hurt. Carolina, same thing. I mean, listen, they scored 19 points against the Jets. They're not very good. Sam Darnold looked good, sure. It was against the Jets. Let's just everything that you can say about Carolina is
it's
caveated
the
with they're against
Jets.
the Jets. They're a bottom 8 team that's made improvements incrementally, but just for gambling purposes, not very good. But I'm not going to gamble their game against the Saints this week because there's still too many unknowns about both teams. It's just let's just watch these teams for now and see what they might be able to do. And then Dallas, Tampa, we don't need to cover. I think everybody knows what to expect with Dallas. A lot of offense, a lot of defense, and Tampa Bay just can somebody like actually check if they're under the salary cap, please, because it doesn't make sense. So the only game really is San Francisco and the Lions, which this is just a classic case of a backdoor cover. And I think the only real takeaway here is that the Lions are their offensive line will allow for fantasy production from the guys who anyone smart was saying will be productive. and that's Hawkinson and the running backs. And they will have their moments. They will be competitive, but they're not going to win. And they're going to play hard, but they're not going to win. I would be careful playing them on big lines because, as they showed us, they can cover. But I don't expect them to win. I wouldn't expect much out of the Lions this year. They're still a bad team. And I think the 49ers, listen, I rank the 49ers, I think at 15, just above the Washington football team. And everybody's considered the 49ers this amazing team the last couple of years since the Super Bowl run. And they've certainly been very, very good. But I think they'll be more average this year, somewhere between the Titans and the Redskins. And I think this defense is a little overblown. It's slowly but surely been losing key players at key positions the last couple of years, and they still have Bosa, but it's not quite as talented as it was. And the coach is gone. Salah's at the Jets now, and they lost Mike LaFleur, the quarterback coach or whatever he did on offense, and like with the quarterback thing and the constantly cycling the players, like the offensive line is good. It's a good team. They'll have a winning record, but I wouldn't expect them to blow teams out of the water. And they showed us that like they're not going to. So good team, but probably not as good as most of you think.
Yeah, and it was that was definitely the trap because Detroit, I got the same feeling of the Browns from a few years ago. Remember those Browns teams that just they couldn't win a game, and it wasn't that they were never getting blown out. They would find ways to lose. And that's kind of the same with this Lions team. Like they are going to come out and compete, as you mentioned. And so if the Lions ever find themselves, well, I guess it's a tricky one. I was about to say if they're ever a double digit underdog to, not bet against them, but then we got Green Bay. So that's, I don't know. Like, I don't feel comfortable betting against them as a double digit underdog because they're going to fight.
Well, here's what you do in that instance is you put Green Bay on a teaser, bring them down to
Mhm,
like -3.5, and then you
mhm.
play them because that's much more confident. Or you tease the Lions to like 19, or you just don't play the game. But everything you're saying is 100% correct. That like, gotta be careful with them on these big lines because
Yeah,
they're not gonna quit. Like Dan Campbell, it's clear that these Lions are not going to quit. They
right.
played to the last minute, tried an onside kick. They're not giving up games just because they're down 3 scores. So
I love
you
it.
can't expect them to just be horrible. But that being said, now they're circling back to Green Bay, where Aaron Rodgers might just come in with a vengeance. So it's tricky. It's tricky. I would say like I'm avoiding that game personally. We need some more weeks on. We need a bigger sample with a lot of this.
Yes.
I think the one fair thing we can say is that at the end of the day, they're not going to win a lot of games.
Would agree. I would
The,
agree on that one. They're just not going to get blown out. They're not like the Jaguars.
listen,
Oh,
if you're starting Jared Goff next week over any of the top 9 drafted quarterbacks, if you pick Jared Goff up off waivers and you start him over Ryan Tannehill, let's say, you need to consider a different pastime than fantasy football because the week to play Jared Goff was week 1,
mhm.
not week 2, not week 3, not week 4. You just keep playing Ryan Tannehill. I've played enough fantasy football to know that, and don't spend any fab on him, please. And if you drafted DeAndre Swift and TJ Hawkinson, good for you for paying attention because that was the
Yes.
move. But please, guys, no overreactions. So just a few key things to remember. The Texans, the Raiders, the Lions, they're bad at football. The Jets, the Panthers, the Giants, bad at football for now. The Colts, the Broncos, the Bears will have impressive games, but mostly average at football. They need a lot of things to go right. And then the Packers, the Titans, still good at football. The Cardinals are really good, maybe not as good as we saw. Let's just remember, guys, whatever you saw in week 1 has to be baked into what you thought for 5 months coming into the season. This is not the end all do all. We've seen a lot of crazy week 1 instances over the years. Just status quo, please. Status quo. Let's not change anything drastically. What about you, Aaron? Do you have any
I,
final takeaways for us?
I think you got it right there. Is that it's 1 week. There's so many random variables. If you're an analyst like us, just know, like if you've been researching these games, these players, don't let week one victory lapping. It's fun to be funny about it, but don't take it too seriously. Like even the guys that you were correct on, just no. Like these are professional football players. They've got to have a good game at some point. Even Blake Bortles had a top 12 fantasy football quarterback season. So just don't overreact. Look back. I highly encourage looking back at the games. Don't look at box scores. I don't care about box scores. I don't care about receptions and yards and touchdowns. No, my first thing I'm going to do when I prepare for week two is I'm going to look at snap counts. Snap counts tell a much better story than touchdowns and yards and everything. So don't overreact. Stick to your guns. Adjust. Like, you look at the right things and adjust accordingly, but don't go, oh, Christian Kirk scored 2 touchdowns. Christian Kirk's got to be a top 30 receiver. Sorry to pick on Christian Kirk. I'm a little bit bitter. It's a person that's big on Rondale Moore this year.
We'll finish it off on all apologies to Christian Kirk because you're gonna get what's coming to you, but no, I'm kidding. I love you, Christian Kirk. You're great. Aaron, thank you for joining me today, man. Where can the people find you again? You want to hit them with it?
So I'm on Twitter a lot these days. I'll interact. I'll hit you with some nuggets. Sometimes I'll be a smartass, and I like to think I'm pretty funny too. So you can find me on Twitter at Aaron Stew. That's STEW 09. Aaron Stew 09 on Twitter.
And I'm the early down grinder. I'll tell you where you can't find me on Twitter. If you type Frank Gore into the search bar, I won't pop up because I'm not Frank Gore. But I am the early down grinder. It's value draft picks on Twitter, or for blockchain sports bets, hit us at Parlay Crypto. And remember all that you want to Vive Cuervo.